But if you go back in the early stages of technology or in emerging economic opportunities, if we view it broadly, governments always try to provide incentives or clear a path for companies. And that started really in fintech in China. And basically, I was over there a lot when I was working, and it was clear from the central banking system that they wanted to be able to get more liquidity going to small businesses. And the state-owned enterprise banks are really focused on mid-sized to large companies. So they gave a lot of flexibility in the regulations to let these guys get going. And they did a phenomenal job. They get really big. And once they get really big, the government decides that we need to bring them back into the banking system and therefore create the holding company and subject them to more regulation.
At the same time, it really struck me that after there was that record fine imposed against Alibaba, Alibaba thanked the regulators for the fine. I don't remember IBM back in your day thanking the federal government for suing them.
Well, we as I used to say when I was a CEO, I'm elected every year by the shareholders. So it's a different system, here versus there. But I really mean, I could see that why, if you are operating in China, you need to maintain a close relationship and partnership with the government, because they can impact your business either positively and negatively in a very direct way, in a very quick and direct way.
Does that suggest that China may have an easier time, if you can call it easy, really getting their control over the big tech companies in China because of that different relationship than, for example, Washington would have with the big tech here in the United States?
Well, you think about it, it's not a split government of any way. It's a centralized government in complete control. So if Xi Jinping decides he wants to stop an IPO of Ant, he just stops the IPO of Ant, right? They don't have to go through the process. There's not checks and balances and those sorts of things. So therefore, the government does have a lot of control. And in a lot of the early stage companies, I should say, governments are actually active shareholders in those companies. And over time, they divest, and sometimes they don't. An example would be Lenovo, what we did with selling the PC business to Lenovo. But at the early stage of that relationship, the Chinese government had about 25% share of Lenovo. Now, they've divested over time, but nonetheless, that they come in and out of companies.
At the same time, President Xi has made it very clear he wants to compete on the world stage when it comes to tech. He's made that a priority of his. Does he have to be somewhat concerned about going too far in really curtailing big tech in China because it won't be as competitive with, for example, the United States?
The key is he needs innovation, right? And there's a lot of the areas that they don't have the same expertise and experience in. Take entrepreneurship. I mean, there are a lot of great entrepreneurs in China, but not necessarily in tech in China. So therefore, there's going to be a encouragement, I believe, by the Chinese government for foreign investment in entrepreneurial endeavors, even though in other places they're trying to control foreign investment. So you'll see this sort of almost like it's a split perspective or split interactions. Some areas are going to say they want indigenous innovation, but they need foreign help. And that's how they'll pursue it, in my opinion. Look at Hong Kong, for example. They're getting more control of Hong Kong, but they're putting tax incentives to attract hedge funds and wealthy people to Hong Kong. So you would say, aren't they counter interests of each other, the communist system and socialism versus attracting hedge funds and large wealthy people? Well, they're very pragmatic, and depending upon their goals, they will adjust.
The other big issue this week when it comes to tech was supply chains. As we saw this virtual meeting at the White House, President Biden himself appeared for a time. There's a big chip shortage right now the United States is suffering from. What is the right answer on supply chain, and how different is the U.S. situation on supply chains from that in China?
Well, they're quite different, but basically there's a worldwide constraint at this point in time over chips. It's driven by some factors, pandemic clearly being one of them, demand shifts being the other. There's been much more movement into traditional IT PCs at home than there would have been without a pandemic, as students learning in the house, entertainment in the house, et cetera, et cetera. So those two things combined cause a big demand shift, which the industry has missed. But the industry on the manufacturing side, which are called fabricators, is very concentrated. There are 2 or 3 big players, and most of them are in Asia. In Taiwan, in Korea, they're in Asia. Right? There's still some in the United States. There's very few in Europe, but they're predominantly in Asia, those big companies. So having said all that, right, you have an issue of concentration as a supply problem, which the companies are going to have to address. right? Which is basically how do they create alternative sources of supply so they don't run into these situations again. And they might create their own little fabs, they might form consortiums. That'll all be adjusted. It's going to take time to get through this because fabs are very capital intensive. Having said that, a government's going to have a different view of this. The government's going to view, hey, strategically, I need to get control over this manufacturing capability. I need to bring it back home. It's almost like strategic oil reserves, if I can make that analogy. They're going to have a core group of these kinds of companies housed within their domicile in their countries so they can keep control of a secure supply chain, especially when it comes to national security.
What about China with respect to microchip supply? Do they have a similar problem constraint in being able to get access to microchips?
Theirs are more complicated. It's not just access, it's the technology. Right now, China, their semiconductor infrastructure is about 2 generations behind the current infrastructure. Now, that can be appropriate for a lot of use cases, vehicles and those sorts of things. It's not appropriate for really pushing the edge of technology where they would want to push for national defense. Networks, high-speed networks, 5G, visual recognition, those sorts of things, right? That's the latest technology. They're behind. So their challenges, too. One is how do I get it onshore? And the other is how do I get these strategic technologies, or how do I learn quickly enough to catch up to the rest of the world? They're investing vast amounts of money to do those things. I think it's thick over there, but they're investing vast amounts of money into those companies to go create that infrastructure. They've been at it for a long time, by the way, David, and this is not new. It just takes a long time to catch up because technology keeps moving forward.